What we're going to do tonight is we will begin with 3 awardees, and then we'll take a break for dinner, and then we'll come back with our final 3 recipients. I want to take this moment to thank all of our dinner committee and our over 90 sponsors whose names are featured in the program, on the screens, and in all the promotional materials. If you get a chance to say thank you to them, please do. Tonight would not be possible without your support, so thank you. I think, as everybody knows, CED is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, business-led policy organization. We deliver well-researched analysis and reasoned solutions to our most critical issues. We started in World War II with the Marshall Plan and the Bretton Woods Agreement. We've made progress on early childhood education, corporate governance reforms, and on and on and on. Today, CED is led by 200 members of the business, academic, and civic communities. I'd like to also acknowledge our colleagues from the Conference Board who are here tonight, as well as the members of the Conference Board and CED. And on that note, I would like to introduce our first presenter, our CED member and a former honoree, Dan Rose. Dan, if you'll make your way to the stage. Dan is the chairman of Rose Associates, an owner, developer, and manager of commercial real estate. His projects include the award-winning Pentagon City complex outside of D.C. and One Financial Center in Boston. He was also instrumental in creating the Housing for Performance Arts concept in New York's Manhattan Plaza. Dan has served as an advisor to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, but most importantly, Dan has been a member of CED for decades. Dan will present the CED Leadership Award to his friend Pete Peterson tonight, but before Dan does, I do want to mention another of Pete's friends. Henry Kissinger could not join us tonight, but has sent along a message of congratulations, which is up on the screen. And Henry, thank you for that. And now, Dan Rose. Dan?
Good evening, friends. They asked me to speak because I am the founder of the Pete Peterson fan club. And I'm honored and privileged to speak of Pete later. First, they asked me to speak a bit about CED, but that's somewhat like the minister preaching to the choir. Everybody here at this dinner knows about CED. They know we are the good guys. When people ask about CED, my normal response is that the underlying concept could be called the thinking person's guide to national well-being. CED are the good, rational people it's true, you've heard before, we're a business-oriented group, business-led group, public policy problems. We look for practical solutions to real-world problems. That's our goal. That's our technique. Our goals are simple and straightforward. Continuing economic growth for all Americans. Strong democratic institutions and sustainable capitalism. Capitalism that's so successful that everybody will want to see it continued indefinitely. Those are our straightforward goals. CED believes to achieve those goals, you need straightforward, practical, clearly understandable techniques. You need long-term fiscal health. You need an educational system that provides the human capital both for international competitiveness and for domestic well-being. You need health care that's not only effective but also cost-effective, that gives you the appropriate bang for the buck in your medical treatments. We need more opportunities for women in all areas of economic life. We And CED is a leader in that. We need regulatory policies that promote efficiency rather than strangle the organizations they're part of. Regulation that is effective. We need more voter participation. We need more transparency in campaign financing. These are all the tools that will help us achieve our goal of economic growth for all Americans, for sustainable capitalism, for well-being. Now, CED is a bipartisan organization that works across the political spectrum. We seek workable solutions to national concerns. It's important in this painfully divisive climate that CED never forgets that our quintessentially wise first president, George Washington, our quintessentially wise first president had liberal Thomas Jefferson whispering in his left ear. He had quintessentially conservative Alexander Hamilton whispering in his right ear. And they arrived at workable, feasible problems. In that day and age, it would have been ludicrous to say that by definition, compromise means a betrayal of fundamental principles. They believed in compromise. They believed in working solutions. They created a constitution and immediately started amending it. You had amendments immediately. These were pragmatic people, and this is the message that CED reflects. CED is the outstanding organization of the business world that reflects that thinking. If CED did not exist, we would have to create it. Thank heavens it does exist, and therefore we should encourage it, we should assist it, and we should support it. All right? That's where I stand on CED. I'm an admirer of what they do. Now, tonight, our honoree is Pete Peterson, our longest serving trustee. Pete Peterson is a living example of Ralph Waldo Emerson's comment that institutions are the lengthened shadow of individuals. I love the thought that institutions are the lengthened shadows of institutions, and Pete Peterson is the kind of fellow who has left his imprint on our longest-serving trustee, has left his impact on CED. Through his long-time private service in the private business world, through his business career, his professional career, his public service career, his nonprofit career, and his personal philanthropic activities. This man, who's a hero of mine, has been a role model for so many of us. And it's important to remind ourselves. Pete Peterson was David Rockefeller's hand-picked choice to succeed David as chairman of the Council on Economic Advisors. He was Bill Clinton's hand-picked choice to be chairman of a committee on entitlements and tax reform. And God knows we have to take a hard look at our entitlements, and we have to take a hard look on tax reform. And they chose this good man to be chairman of that bipartisan commission. Before that, Pete had been chairman of the Peterson Commission on Philanthropies. And it was thanks to this good man that legislation was passed requiring every philanthropic group to at least have some minimal contribution that they had to make each year. It was Pete Peterson who advocated that and brought it to successful conclusion. Now, Pete Peterson is a poster boy for the upward mobility that all Americans revere and treasure. This good man was born into a family of poverty-stricken, non-English speaking Greek immigrants who struggled to make a few pennies, put those pennies, invested those pennies in a small diner in Kearney, Nebraska. A small diner that was open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 12 months a year, for 25 years. Pete Peterson came from a family whose vocabulary did not include the word vacation. The idea of a vacation was foreign to this family that worked round the clock. The work ethic that Pete Peterson developed in that diner was reflected in the fact that he graduated from college with a summa cum laude degree, reflecting the disciplined effort that has been a hallmark of Pete's throughout his career. This man is a prime spokesman, the country's foremost spokesman for future-mindedness in a society that has become obsessed with the present. He's a spokesman for the concept of we, us, ours, in a society that has come to think I, me, my. He's a man who, through his philanthropic works, through his professional career, through the many books that he's written, he's conveyed a message, an important message that he learned in childhood, that he learned from his childhood Nebraska farmer neighbors. The message that Pete Peterson has been shouting ever since is, don't eat your seed corn. Don't eat your seed corn. Don't consume today what you need for your future. That's the message that Pete Peterson has conveyed. And on behalf of our children and our grandchildren, whose lives will be better if our society reflects this value, I'm proud to present CED's highest award to my friend, my mentor, and my personal hero, Pete Peterson.
Thank you, Dan, for those overly generous comments. You know, on an important night like this, I always think it's nice if you could start off with a touch of humor, hopefully accompanied by a little bit of wit. But I had a problem. I don't know any such humor. And then I remembered a dinner I was at with Henry Kissinger, my old friend, who was getting an award. And he stood up, walked over to the platform, and quite imperiously, I thought, surveyed the audience. And then at the end of that survey, he said, "Please be seated." That's supposed to be funny. I'll tell Henry about that. You don't know how that will kill him. He will say, you didn't deliver it right. Okay. Now to Dan, I want to thank you not only for your generosity, but for your kindness. I don't know how many of you noticed this. I did. He referred to me as the longest serving trustee of CED. He could have said the oldest trustee, but he was kind enough to let you make that calculation, not him. You know, if you've been a trustee as long as I have, you've had an opportunity to look at some of the good works and leadership. I was there at the time of the Marshall Plan and what you did there. I was there at the time of establishing the IMF. I was there at the time of the World Bank. All of these are examples of major initiatives. And tonight, I would like to take just a few minutes to talk about a threat that I think is transcendent, that threatens the economic future of this country long term, and most certainly that of our children. And not only state what the threat is, but the need once again, and the serious need, for business leadership. Now, I felt so strongly that this threat, which is not our short-term debt, but our long-term debt in this country, is so serious that we ought to set up a foundation to do that. So since I rarely put my money where my mouth is, I decided I would on this occasion and put most of my resources into this foundation, whose main theme is doing something about our long-term debt. Now, I promise you that I will only give you 2 statistics, just enough to illustrate my point. First of all, I call the long-term debt that we confront unsustainable. But let me see if you agree with me. If you look at the official projections of long-term debt, I keep saying long-term, it's 5 times the average level of debt in this country. Unthinkable in my belief. To give you one more statistic, you know in this organization that economists rarely agree, but they agree on this, that we're living in a far more competitive, technological, R&D world than we have been. And we, with our rather disappointing performance in math and science, education, yes, in infrastructure, where we rank 16th, yes, in training of workers. If you look at all those fields, what you find is that the interest costs alone to meet these big debts long term are 3 to 4 times the total amount that we spend on R&D, on worker training, on infrastructure, and so forth and so forth. So clearly, one of the great questions that you will face and our kids will face is, where do we get the resources? Now, we wanted to be sure. When I say we, I was happy enough to include my son, Michael, who I was smart enough to make CEO of the foundation. But we decided that what we ought to do is make significant grants to the 5 leading think tanks, left, right, center, and so forth. And we said to them, tell us what you think about the long-term debt outlook, and tell us what you would do about it. Much to my pleasure, they were unanimous in their view of how serious this problem was. And they each had their plans, reflecting their philosophic differences, to be sure. But there was widespread agreement. Now, the solutions aren't all that complicated. Doing something about them is. We're going to have to increase revenues one way or another. And I would hope that when we're in the course of saying we're going to reform revenues, we look at tax expenditures, which are the subsidies of our tax system. I saw a study the other day, I couldn't believe the number, that indicated that the tax expenditures were about $1.5 trillion a year, or more than all of the corporate and individual taxes. So we're going to have to do something about the tax system. Then we have entitlements. You may not know that entitlements account for 100% of the increased expenditures over the long term. 100%. I don't know how you get our debt under control without reforming entitlements. And then, of course, there's health care. We spend twice as much as the rest of the world on health care without any appreciable difference in outcomes. Therefore, we are setting up, have set up, a major health care center that, unlike any others that I know, focuses 100% on what do we do first to identify those places that have good outcomes and lower health care costs. And having identified them, what do we do to get them implemented across the country? So I'd now like to close on the following note. It's one thing for the CED and Pete Peterson to outline proposals at dinners and meetings. But clearly, as someone once said, when economics gets important enough, it gets political. I don't know how many of you have had personal experience with the AARP, but you may know that the membership of that organization is 37 million strong. Furthermore, if you remember from the last political election, presidential, it was very interesting that they ran a major advertising effort. And the headline was, if you are inclined to reform Social Security and Medicare, we will see you at the next election. Now, that's the kind of comment that gets the attention of political figures. So what I'm saying is that we are dealing here with something that's very unpopular in America, making sacrifices for the longer-term good of the economy and our children. Now, we are setting up, have set up, something that's a little dream of mine, and that's what I call the AAYP, the American Association of Young People. And nothing would help me grow old gracefully than to see an AAYP of 37 million members, along with their parents. Keep in mind This is a moral issue I'm talking about. Someone said to me once that the ultimate test of a moral society is the kind of world it leaves to its children. So I say to you, thank you very much. We've started. We have 50 colleges now across the country. Bill Clinton, bless him, president, has been active at every meeting we've ever had across the country. And we would welcome your support. So please be seated, and thank you.